Hey everybody, thanks for watching this, my first video for this chess series that I'm going to be doing. So basically it's just going to be an opening survey. I'm going to go through as many different openings as I can in short 10-minute clips or so. Basically just to give you a general idea about the ideas of the openings, show you a few of the example games from the top players that are using these openings, and give you kind of an idea of if these are openings that you might want to play and learn yourself. Since this is my first video, I wanted to give you a very brief introduction to myself, and then a couple quick notes about what these videos are going to be like. So I'm an expert rated tournament chess player, working towards becoming a master. Was second place at the Kansas Open last year, and in high school I qualified for the Dinker Invitational for my state, which is a tournament named after a guy named Arnold Dinker, and one player from each state goes and represents their state and plays against all the other players from other states. So that was a nice honor. Just a kind of a quick idea of what these videos are going to be like. So I'm going to go through as many different opening variations as I can, and there's hundreds of them. And so, for example, the one I'm going to go over today is the Sicilian Najdorf variation, which, if you've seen the Queen's Gambit show that just came out on Netflix, it's a variation that the girl plays as the black side. She plays the Najdorf variation. And so I've picked out a few games here that I'm going to show you guys today. And then I've got a few rankings here just to kind of give you an idea of this is something that you want to play and try to learn. So for all these opening variations, I'm going to tell you what type of game it is. If it's a slow, boring game, we're going to label it snooze fest. If it's kind of a slow game where you're just kind of maneuvering your pieces around the board and it's the long-term plans, we're going to label that strategic. If it's kind of a fast-paced fight where tactics are flying across the board and there's some risk involved to playing it, we're going to label that dynamic. And then if it's just a crazy game where each player is attacking each other, then we're going to call that fire on the board, which, by the way, is a chess term made famous by Alexei Shirov, who is one of the most famous chess players, who wrote a book called Fire on the Board. And then I'm going to rate every opening on a scale of 1 to 5 on how long it's going to take to learn the opening. So, for example, this one here, the Sicilian Najdorf, is a 5 because it is probably the most difficult opening to gain all the knowledge necessary to play it at a high level. And there's tons of books, and basically the variations in this opening have been studied for years and years and years and have been played many, many times. So you really need to know what you're doing on this. And then, like I said, lastly, we're going to have a risk factor rating. So is this something that you can safely play with little knowledge? Is there a little bit of risk to it? Or is this the type of opening that you know you're going to have to risk losing in order to try to win? So basically, like, is this something where you're sacrificing a piece, or you know that your opponent's going to be able to attack you? And so, for example, this first one, the Sicilian Najdorf, risk it for the biscuit, because very often your king is going to be stuck in the middle of the board, not being able to castle, and your opponent's going to be trying to attack you while you're also attacking your opponent. So it is very risky. If either player makes a mistake, they're probably going to lose the game. So that's kind of the general idea of what we're going to be doing in these short videos, and so let's get right to it. So the Sicilian Najdorf is basically these first few moves. So the Sicilian in general, if you don't know, was white plays e4 and black plays c5. The main move is knight f3, just trying to develop the piece, and then they want to play d4, so they need something to protect that square. And then black plays knight f6 to attack this pawn, and white defends it with knight c3. So this is the main line of the Sicilian variation in general. And then the Najdorf is signified by this move a6. And in general, it's kind of a risky move. You see black doesn't develop a piece, but they are planning to play b5, and get their bishop out on this long diagonal here, and then use these pawns to push towards a potential black queenside castle. So in general, this is a little bit risky because you're not developing any of your kingside pieces right from the start. So I've got 3 games here. There's a ton of different variations that white can choose from and also black can choose from. I've got a few games here just to show a couple of those. So one of the most famous openings in all of chess history is the Sicilian Najdorf poison pawn variation. And so black actually gets a free pawn here with their queen at some point, but white says, I'm going to give you that pawn, and with your queen being out here away from the rest of the board, I'm going to try to take advantage of that. So this was actually in the World Championship between Nigel Short and Garry Kasparov, where Kasparov won quite handily. And so I'll show you this game. Bishop g5 is a very aggressive move, and basically it leaves this pawn open, but it's developing a piece, and white's going to try to attack black. So again, a very aggressive move here, f4, trying to create a pawn storm around the black king. And black says basically, you know, do whatever you want over here. I'm going to go win this pawn. And so he does. And white does have an option to play rook b3, rook b1 here instead of knight b3 to attack the queen. That's another variation. This time Short chose to go knight b3. And as you can see, basically black has won a pawn, but his queen is off on the side of the board here. And after this exchange here, you can see black's not going to castle, and his king is going to be stuck in the middle, which is a very risky thing to do in general. But he does have these this wall of pawns here that he's hoping will protect his king. So I'm going to go through some of these moves pretty quick here in general. And as you can see, black says, you know, I'm not going to castle over here on this king side, and I'm going to stay behind this wall of pawns, so I might as well go ahead and advance this pawn and try to get after the white king. So again, I'm going through these moves pretty quick. Black actually wins another pawn here, but again, it's, you know, potentially opening a line against his own king later on. So white is hoping that this pawn that he just gave black actually benefits him. So again, black is kind of curled up into a ball here. He's up 2 pawns, and he's going to have to try to untangle his way out. So he sacrifices the exchange. If you don't know, sacrificing the exchange means giving your rook up for a knight or a bishop, because the knight and the bishop are worth 3 points and the rook is worth 5. So it is a sacrifice, but black has already gained 2 pawns, so this helps him alleviate some of the pressure that's against his king. And then, like I said, I'm going to go through some of this pretty quick. Black is trying to disrupt the king side over here, and now white has created a weakness on the light squares here. So he's hoping that his bishop will just fill that up. And that won't be an issue later. So this is a very interesting game. Again, black's king was never really feeling super safe this whole game, but Kasparov, you know, potentially the greatest player of all time, he knows what he's doing. So he ends up getting into a favorable position here where he plays this really cool move, queen c6 check, and Nigel Short actually resigned here. The idea being that if he plays rook g2 blocking, this is actually checkmate here because the rook can't go back because it's pinned to the king. If white plays queen g2 here, black can actually just take that pawn and then force a trade of rooks. And if you're new to chess, basically these 2 pawns aren't going to be able to be stopped by this white king. And so black can take this pawn, and then he can push these pawns over here. While the king goes over to try and deal with those, the black king can run up and take this pawn and queen. So this is a hopeless position. So again, that was a really cool game by one of the great Najdorf players of all time, Garry Kasparov. and which he shows, the poison pawn variation where he won a pawn and was able to keep his king safe for long enough. So another game that I have here to show you is from Fabiano Caruana and Boris Gelfand. Caruana, as you might know, played in the World Championship the last time against Magnus Carlsen and didn't lose any games against him. He ended up losing in the tiebreakers, but one of the highest rated players of all time, and definitely him losing this shows just how dynamic the Sicilian Najdorf can be. So this is a more popular variation that white can play, in where they put their bishop on e3 and their queen on d2 and their pawn on f3, and then they usually do a pawn storm here with their pawns on the king side. And so this looks completely different than the last game, and which is one of the reasons people like to play the Najdorf, because it's so flexible. You can play in many different ways. One of the reasons I picked this game to show you is to show, so white is moving his pawns on the king side to attack the black king, and black is moving his pawns to attack the white king at the same time. So you know that somebody's going to get there first and get the other person's king. And this is a cool moment. So white attacks this knight, and black doesn't even move it or defend it. He just attacks the other knight. White moves his knight away, black moves his knight away, and then the pawn storm really comes for each side. White is now attacking this bishop, and again, black just leaves it to be taken, but attacks a piece for white. So this time they do actually each take each other's piece, and you get this kind of crazy position where this rook is very good on this file. He's going to end up taking this pawn, but white is hoping that he can push these pawns on the king side and get to black's king first. And Caruana actually attacks this pawn here, but Gelfand just ignores it, and he says, I'm going to go get your king. And so I'm going to play through a few moves here. Yeah, white's getting in a little bit of trouble here. Gelfand's attack got to the king first, and his king is kind of not in a very good spot here. So I'm going to go through this game pretty quick, just as a kind of an illustration of this variation, and I'm going to get to the ending because it's kind of an interesting ending. So black played knight c3 check, and actually Caruana resigned. And if white takes this, you'll notice that this pawn is stopping the king from escaping. So, after some checks, all these moves are forced, and black can just take this bishop, and he's up a bishop, and he's going to checkmate the white king pretty soon. So that's another variation. And then I'll show you this last one here. Another very popular variation is just to move this pawn one square. Kasparov was kind of famous for this, where he would just move this one square, and his king oftentimes was kind of stuck in the middle of the board and in a kind of an awkward looking place, but he just really knew how to handle the positions, and he knew he would get a counterattack going on this other side of the board. So he shifts his knight over, and he's eyeing this c4 square. And again, I'm going through this kind of fast. This is a really good move to know in a lot of these variations of the Sicilian. Once you've traded your c pawn for the d pawn, you can put your rook on the same file as the king here. So this is just kind of a really cool game. This knight is on a really good position. So Kasparov's done really well here so far. And then I wanted to show one more interesting point here that I thought. So the position is getting kind of closed here right now. Closed just meaning it's locked up a little bit. But Kasparov puts his bishop here with the hope that one day he can get this pawn out of the way, and then this bishop will be a monster on this diagonal here. So after a few moves, I thought it was interesting that Polgar, by the way, this is Judith Polgar, the highest rated female chess player of all time, and she was known for being a very aggressive attacking player, so this is kind of a fun game to watch. I thought it was interesting she played f4, allowing Kasparov to take this pawn and clear the long diagonal for the bishop, which in general is not something that you would advise people to do. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly again here. And again, like I said, this long diagonal with the bishop is going to decide the game. I think Polgar thought that she might be able to get her pawn down here and get a new queen, but Kasparov is getting to the king faster. And so basically the idea here is that if Polgar went back to take this bishop, Kasparov could take this pawn on e4 with check, and that's kind of a hopeless position. And so Polgar tried to find a different way to keep the queens on the board and have some hope, because once the queens are traded off, if black is up a pawn, he's just going to win. So, but again, in general, his attack got there first, and this is pretty much a hopeless position, and Polgar resigned here. So I hope this just gives you some sort of idea of if this is something that you want to play. You're going to have to spend a lot of time to learn this, but you will learn a lot about the game of chess in general if you do play this opening. This is the Sicilian mainline variation, and then you can get into the Najdorf variation by playing the move a6 here. So very dynamic, very risky opening, but a lot of the top players play it all the time, and it's a cool opening to learn even if you don't play it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this gives you an idea if this is something you want to play or not. And I look forward to the next one. I hope you'll watch that one as well.